Come on by and have a bite at the CrossRoad Diner, the place your spirit goes when it may be time to change direction. Hello and welcome, Steve McCurdy again. Here we are in the Crossroads Diner. With me, my guest today is soon to be Dr. Samantha Sandy in Dublin, Ireland. But Sam and I go back to Houston, Texas, where I was a director. She was an actress and singer, and we've got a lot of history in that particular area. So the Crossroads Diner, as you have become somewhat aware, is that place where your spirit goes when it may be time to change direction. And so what I like to do is talk to folks about their journey and those crossroad points. Now, you and I knew each other when you were in high school and you were getting ready to go off to college. Tell us the elevator version of what you wanted then and where you ended up.
Um, at the time, I just really wanted to. I loved music. Sort of, I kind of mentioned a bit earlier that sort of feeling of the music begins where the words end. It's sort of this feeling, that emotion and that story and that irresistible change that is just too much to,
Sure.
yeah. And I thought, oh my gosh, how great would that be to do as a career, to tell those kinds of stories and to get involved in that way, especially with something so universal that just appeals to everybody. Everyone's got some song that appeals to them, or that really just speaks to them. And I wanted to be part of making that. So I decided I wanted to be a singer, I wanted to be a performer or an actress.
And as a result of that, you did what?
So I wound up going actually to my mother's alma mater up in California. Sadly, their music department is no longer with us.
Oh,
La Notre Dame de Namur University, which is a really fantastic university, actually. While it's very small, first women's college in California,
no.
and also just I think one of the best music programs, just in terms of not just the faculty and how much uh, time you get with them, but also the camaraderie between the students was really amazing.
And at this college, and you're studying music, you had a sort of a new epiphany. You had something seduce your attention. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I had joined this music history course as kind of a prerequisite part of the
Right.
degree. And, I was excited about it. We got to this bit on Donizetti, king of the mad scene in aria, but in opera, sorry.
Mhm.
And he did this thing, the Tudor slash Stuart trilogy, where it starts with Anne Boleyn, goes up to Mary, Queen of Scots, and ends with Elizabeth Tudor and her second favorite, Roberto Devereux. And as I was starting to look into these people and look into their lives more, there's this kind of moment of like, oh, there are a lot of ways to tell their stories. And depending on how you do it, the story completely changes. I mean, this is an Italian composer in the 1800s writing about Tudor monarchs, and also notably a Catholic Italian composer writing in the Romantic era, writing about these Reformation era people. And it's like, how does that change how you see this person? And
Mhm.
how does that change how you interact with their lives and empathize with them as well?
Okay. And you get to sing.
Oh, absolutely. Always a plus.
Always a plus for you. Absolutely. So as a result of that, you didn't change your major, but you added to it, right?
Oh yeah. I think it's sort of I'm a terminal sort of overachiever in that respect. Just sort of like if my schedule looks like too relaxing or like I could enjoy life at times, I can just be like, no, I need to add 8 more courses. you know?
So you get a degree. Tell me your degree. How'd you?
So I was a dual major. I was a dual major in vocal performance and history,
Okay.
um, which actually lined up really nicely with what I wanted to do. I wrote my capstone paper on the history of Verdi's operas and like the Risorgimento in Italy, and that was just really fun.
That's cool.
Um,
That's cool.
yeah.
So you're out of college, and it's like go get a job, and and what took place then? What happened there?
realizing that I had perhaps, I entered the stunningly lucrative and, very stable job fields of history and opera. Um, so there was a bit where, like, I think I always knew that I wanted to get my master's degree.
Right.
And as I was applying, I decided I'd reached this sort of point in my career as a performer, not just in terms of feeling pigeonholed in roles, which is something like if you're a blonde soprano, I've got news for you. Um, but also starting to feel just kind of burnt out. I was starting to feel like I was doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Right.
And there's also sort of a push. I'm sure if you talk to many young actors, I'm sure you experienced it yourself. Of there's you, Steve, the person, but there's also you, Steve, the artist, and then there's you, Steve, the sort of I don't know how else to say it, the artistic product. And when you are a singer,
Hmm.
you're pushing Samantha Sandy, the product, as well as everything else. And that it is one of the most draining things in the world. So I'm at this point where I'm starting to get tired of doing that. And I'm starting to feel this pull to explore this love of history more. And lo and behold, finding all these great master's programs in Scotland or England, or as my Irish grandmother insisted, Trinity, I ought to apply. And I told her, there's no way I'm getting in there, but we can give it a go. Um, and so, yeah, it coincided with the end of a relationship as well. And I think it was at that point that was sort of the kick out the door that I really needed.
Right. So not only did you go off to school, you left the country. Yeah, you went to a whole different world. But yeah, you make a really good point, and I think it's really important for my notion that lives around the idea of the Crossroads Diner is we are multiple things. We are, as we grow and evolve, we become more dimensional, um, and those things that we thought we wanted at one point in time get added to, and that's not a change, that's not a lack of commitment, that's you wouldn't have learned this part of you have you not gone on that other journey.
Yeah.
Sometimes part of the journey that we take is to find other parts of ourselves. So, so, but you didn't just go to get a master's. You're in a doctoral program. Talk to me a little bit about how that evolved.
Oh gosh. So there's sort of these two considerations, I think. I mean, part of it is I, you know, developed got that sort of Christopher Walken sketch in SNL where he just needs more cowbell. Um that was that was me with medieval religious and purgatorial culture, and I got so fascinated with how the Middle Ages deals with loss, deals with community support. And so I was like, I want to dig even deeper. And Trinity, there's a fabulous my supervisor for the PhD, Ruth Karras, who's one of the more like influential writers in this field, and whose writings really opened my eyes, and kind of made me look at the lives of medieval women in different ways. So I was like, if I have the opportunity to work with this person, yes, please sign me up. And also, I kind of felt like my time in Ireland wasn't done yet. It was like, there's more left to do here. And I'm thrilled to say that, that feeling proved correct.
Well, so you got a master's, and
Mhm.
now you're on the doctorate track,
Yes.
which is going to wrap up from our visit earlier. That's next year sometime, right?
Yeah, just about. So I'm submitting my completed thesis in 2023. And then I will say, as a medieval historian, I was disappointed to find out that the thesis defense, the kind of practice of, well, the best thesis defense is a good thesis offense. But no, I just have to talk about my work and prove that I did the research. I can't bring a catapult in or anything. But, but
Damn, that would have
I
been so
know.
cool and so you. Yeah.
Right. Also, I mean, it's like you're asking a medieval historian to defend their work. Like, okay, bring it on, bucko. Like, but no, it's going to be a discussion, and we're going to go over maybe points of the thesis that could be strengthened. I go back and do the edits, and then Dr. Sandy. you know.
And then what's the plan? Is that, I mean, right now, is that 100% of it? Get that and let's see what happens, or do you have a desire that has some
You
focus to
know,
it?
I think my biggest desire is to teach. So I've been teaching at Trinity since I started my undergraduate degree, and I've taught everything from medieval history to modern history. Although, unfortunately, if you're one of my kids, it's kind of like bad luck. Everything ties back to medieval history.
Right.
Um, and I found that I really like that. It's so cool, not just, planning the classes themselves, it's watching people learn how to engage with the material,
Mm.
watching them come up with things that maybe you yourself haven't noticed because you've been staring at it in your lesson plans for the last couple of months. Um, and I love reading their essays at the end of term. I mean, sometimes it's sort of like the joys range from, you cited this correctly, I don't have to yell at you about this anymore, to, oh my God, that's a really cool question that you should absolutely turn into a master's later on, you know?
Oh, really? Excellent.
Yeah, it's so great. And
So
yeah,
what percentage of that is obligatory? I've got to get this paper on this woman's desk, and what of it is an adventure and a journey and a learning for them?
oh, I really want to flatter myself and say that I am the Robin Williams of the medieval world and that,
Well,
there's an
I'd
"Oh
buy that,
Captain."
but I smell an argument coming from you.
I was going to say there's not really a lot of "Oh Captain, my Captain" moments during teaching, but I will say I've had students, I think it's maybe 60 or no 70-30, but it's not as clean cut as just, ugh, I'm going to get this on her desk or this fascinates me. Sometimes you can watch a student fall in love with the topic as they start researching it more. So it starts out as a, Professor Sandy told me to do this. And then it turns into me getting emails at 3 a.m. Like, I've had a breakthrough. Do you have any books you could recommend? And it's like, yes, go to bed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Save send until at least 7 in the morning. So, so, we're talking about crossroads. We're talking about epiphanies. We're talking about wake up calls that come that cause you to, change direction, and you're not even sure what the heck's going on. And the confidence that goes with that. One of the things that you and I discussed once upon a time was the notion of imposter syndrome, and a very big, a big thing for anybody at the front end of a new field. But also, you tell me that's. Talk to me a little bit more about your notion that, that's a struggle that all of you are kind of going through.
Oh gosh, yes, 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 yes. I once had a student who, I mean, this girl was just absolutely brilliant. And she's coming up to me and she says, I guess it gets easier and you get more confident in yourself the more specialized you get in your field and the more degrees you have. And I'm just sitting here like, oh, no, you don't. Like, I just presented my work at one of the largest conferences for medieval historians, the Leeds International Medieval Congress.
Okay.
And it's massive. I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of people descend on the city of Leeds to discuss medieval history, all elements of it. And I met specialists who have taught at Ivy League universities, have like been trailblazers in their fields for the last like 40 years, and they're still anxious
Mm.
about their work and its relevancy. And I think it's something that never completely goes away, but you get better at sitting with yourself over time. And I would also say, don't just rely on yourself for this. Like, talk to your colleagues, talk to your friends. I think it's very easy to put the blinders on and to feel like, because you've been sitting with your work for however long, and you're probably tired of looking at it after a certain point, you're stressed out about it. But then you sit down with one of your friends who hasn't sat with that work as long, and you talk with them about it. And not only do they have these perspectives that really help kind of put your own anxiety into perspective, but you realize that, like, all the people who you think are brilliant are also really nervous. And chances are that means even though you're nervous, there's a lot of people who think you're probably pretty awesome too,
Right. And
you
I
know?
had a wonderful teacher once who said, your job is not to be the final authority. Your job is to be a little bit farther down the road and letting these folks who are coming up go, here's some things you need to kind of watch out for. And here's some stuff that you're going to really want to not miss. And
Oh
that,
yeah.
you're sort of a tour guide who just has one more tour on that road than they do. I was watching a documentary on Netflix about the first discovery or the first imaging of a black hole, and it was a global community. They had, in order to get it not peer reviewed, but in order to have confidence that they were going about it in the right way, there were four different teams all approaching it from an independent uh, set of theories, and they didn't tell each other what they were so that they wouldn't contaminate it. But like the
Right.
guys that were heading it up were working with Stephen Hawking, so if you're
Right.
gonna, and they had imposter syndrome with Stephen, and Stephen just didn't. you know, he he was just because he wasn't trying to be anything other than curious. All his whole deal
Yeah.
was, I'm not the authority. I just wonder about things. But his wondering would lead them all in different directions. Anyway, the ultimate thing was that there are these kids with PhDs who can give you the square root of infinity is 75 places, and they're working with this group that's working with Stephen Hawking, and they all came up with the same, with different directions. They came up with the same image.
Right.
So their fundamental data approach was validated, but they were like little kids. They were like,
Yeah.
"This worked," you know, and I would guess that at your conference at Leeds, uh, I'm sure that there were some folks there that were competitive, but there were probably more that were curious.
Yes.
The-
There's oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut
No,
across
no,
there,
no,
Steve.
no.
For the life of me, I cannot remember the saint's name. It might be Saint John Vianney, but I could be wrong. But or no, it might have been even a Steinbeck quote. Steinbeck, Catholic saints, potato, potato. Um, Same vibe. But like, it was this quote that said, now that you do not have to be perfect, you can be good.
Hmm.
And I think that's how it is in academia. Like, there are sometimes you'll get some people who can be a little more competitive. And there's definitely an old school streak. Like, one of my favorite things, and I'm so glad we don't do this as much anymore, I hope, in Victorian academia is reading them like tear each other's works apart in this really petty, flowery, over the top way. But for the most part, unless you're Lord Lordington of the snuff box, that's probably not going to be how you approach it, because it just doesn't help. Even if someone is wrong or if they make a mistake
Hmm.
in their paper, what most scholars will do, especially if it's a young scholar, they might take you aside later and just be like, "Oh, hey, have you considered da 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 da? Why don't you should go check that out. I think that would be interesting to you." But it's never going to be mean. I have yet to encounter someone who is really just, so competitive and so cutthroat or so dismissive that they're willing to dismiss someone out of hand. And that doesn't happen. For the most part, we're all out there grasping and we're all doing our best. And I think that's kind of understood. And the good news is, like, a lot of the panels that I went to, we had fun. We told, like, one the panel that I'm on is about undead saints and interactions with relics and people making bargains with these saints and having arguments with them. And a lot of times, it's funny. And my colleagues and I were talking about this, about how much I think the Middle Ages gets kind of portrayed as this very dry or
Yeah.
tragic era, but it's colorful. And a lot of times these stories are meant to be funny, you
Mhm.
know?
Right. But it occurs to me while you were talking, one of the other fears one would have related to the notion of imposter syndrome is being taken taken so seriously that you don't then get really good criticism. You don't get expansive feedback. You know that oh well, they know what they're talking about, and that it ends, and that you are
Yeah.
isolated. Um, is there validity to that to you?
It definitely is a worry. And I think it's why it is always good to seek out people who are more experienced, who are smarter than you, and you will know them when you find them. Um, I am currently looking at one, and it's one of those things where like, don't be intimidated. It's not a competition. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, in my experience, some of the smartest people I've ever met have also been some of the kindest, and they've, if,
Yeah.
depending on their experience, have also struggled with this and are willing to help. I used to be so in awe of my supervisor, like this woman who's written like 7 pivotal books in our field. And I'm just sitting here like, why is she bothering with me? But literally one of the kindest people I've ever met. And during the lockdown, when I think all of us, our research was indefinitely halted. We had no access to anything. Visas were a concern for those of us who were students. Um, and frankly, writing and reading and doing all of that was the farthest thing from any of our minds. And she would meet with us, once every other week. And it was not about our progress. Like it was nominally about like, what are you doing? But it was mostly just her checking in on us to make sure we were okay and to ask if we needed anything from her. And I would say to people, when you struggle with imposter syndrome like that, or you struggle to find that, I encourage you to be that, because
Yes. Yeah.
it is very intimidating out there. And I think, what was it? There's that Kurt Vonnegut sort of thing, we are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about who we pretend to be. And I think that influences how we see other people. So if you treat other people very kindly and you make a point to be that person, I think it will make you more willing to, I guess, believe other people are also willing to be that. And if they're not, well, you're being that,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
One of the one of the
you know.
one of the projects that I do annually, it's the one that I look forward to the most, is I help write the awards program for the Texas Business Hall of Fame. Now, these are
Hmm.
6 people that have been selected because of their business acumen and their contribution to the economy of Texas. But equal to that is what is their philanthropic engagement.
Right.
And so, what I have learned from that and from my brief stint doing theater in New York is the bigger they are, the nicer they are. And those folks that are, off-putting and very officious are terrified. They are afraid that they are the Wizard of Oz. They're afraid somebody's going to look behind the curtain and see a moment of less than
Yeah.
and unveil them. So one of the things that one of these fellows, I was doing his debrief yesterday. One of the things that he said, he's got. Well, I was working with actually his second in command, and she was saying that he has a policy that if the deal looks great and the numbers are wonderful and all of that, but you're uncomfortable with the spirit of the CEO, pass on the deal.
Yeah.
And she said, we passed on $1 billion opportunity. We would have all made gargantuan amounts of money, but he did not trust the spirit of the person that we were starting to do business with. Not that there was anything dark or evil about it. It just, there wasn't a good feeling.
The vibe was
And
off.
the vibe was off. And he made a business decision based on that vibe. And and the thing that his people learned about that is the numbers aren't the whole story.
Yeah.
And so, but as we're coming up, we get the impression that all these people know a lot more than us, and that we are going to. There are things that we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know, and so we get kind of uncomfortable with all that. So, for me, this notion about exploring crossroads and the idea that our paths are going to change because we're going to evolve, not because we have failed, is
And
really important to me.
that's a big thing too. Something that I think, especially people my age, deal with is that, my students currently, I think, deal with pressures and expectations that I did not have at their
Hmm.
age.
Right.
Not that there wasn't pressure, but it's different now. It's so competitive out there. And the truth is, and I think it's something that makes people kind of uncomfortable because we want to tell ourselves, if I cross all my T's and dot all my I's and I do everything right, then there's success, right?
Hmm. Right.
But sometimes you can do absolutely everything right and it still doesn't land. You don't stick the landing all the time. And it's sort of one of those things where being able to forgive yourself, being able to see a failure not as the thing that defines you, but as just like, okay, this is something that happened. We can go and kind of reflect on this, sure. But sometimes I think that kind of ability to take care of yourself and to forgive yourself and to extend that same compassion to yourself is really helpful, especially in environments where sometimes, unfortunately, that compassion is not always as readily available. And, it, it's a very hard line to tread sometimes. I don't assume that my success is guaranteed in this field, but I do know I can do my best, and that if we need to recalibrate at some point, then well, we survived one recalibration. What's another, right?
Right. And it makes for a better story.
It does.
The movie, the script is about, peaks and valleys and peaks and valleys and overcoming. I had a you mentioned, and I was so grateful that you did. You mentioned the notion of self forgiveness.
Mm,
I have a bias that tells me I don't think you can forgive anybody until you forgive yourself.
yeah.
I think that it's the fundamental understanding of our humanity and the okayness of it
Yeah.
that is critical there. But I had the failure paradigm reframed for me only 2 weeks ago, and it's this the notion that you're making progress and you hit a wall, and that you keep trying. And what it amounts to is, as you evolve, you discover it's not a wall; it's a step.
Mm,
That you just haven't been, you know, aiming high enough or haven't evolved to the point that you can jump that high. But then
mm,
you've got another step, and there will be another wall. That
cool.
the presence of the wall is not evidence of failure.
Yeah.
It's this is the evolution point. This is the awareness of this is the place. Okay, this is where I've got to level up as a spirit. What's your next wall? What's the next wall that's going to be a step for you?
I think the next wall that's going to be a step is definitely the career field itself. I'm hoping to get into teaching, and failing that, I'm hoping to do some museum work, um, because I do love archiving work and I do love curating. It is fun. I just like handling old, like, cool artifacts. It's just and I think currently my long suffering partner, who's had to sit through all of my research, is probably just like, the fourth option is that at some point she's just going to open a cursed tomb and that'll be that. And we're at peace with that, and it's fine. um,
I
but
could
I
tell.
think it's scary, and it's also scary too because I am in a foreign country and none of my family are out here. I have a lot of amazing friends and, I guess, chosen family,
Hmm.
you know, and I have a really wonderful partner, and we're kind of talking about our own future. And it's sort of like, it's not just, finding the career, putting on the white dress, da 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 da. It's also about, okay, well, once we're there, how do we move forward? How does one adult? How
Yes.
does one
The
do the
book on
whole?
adulting has not well been written.
No, it has not. And you know what? That's actually something I was thinking about the other day. So, like, ever since we've started discussing, our future together, I guess, the CIA agent that watches me through my laptop is like, well, we're going to recommend all these, like, wedding services and stuff now in your advertisements.
Right.
But there's always these, like, gurus and stuff on Instagram where it's like, 12 easy steps to a successful marriage, or like how to be the perfect wife. And I'm just sitting here like, I feel this way with anyone who tries to sell me the definitive answer on something as complicated and deeply nuanced and changeable as human emotions, as career, as philosophy, because it's just sort of like, how could you know this? I think, it's not that the advice is always bad, sometimes it's good, but the idea that it's ever just going to be smooth sailing and that there won't be a constant need to evolve and grow, I don't think that's true.
If there is a heaven, and if I get to go, and if Walt Disney is there, we're going to have a long set to on the notion of happily ever after.
I'll
Because
join you.
huh? What? You got
I'll
my
join
back?
I'll join you in beating up Walt Disney. Let's do this.
Well, I don't want to. I don't want to beat him up. I want to accept his apology, if anything, because I did. I bought into that idea that there is a point of arrival,
Mm,
and that once the arrival has happened, the struggle will cease, which makes the struggle a bad thing
yeah,
versus being maybe the thing, you
yeah.
know, and so you and I both met in musical theater, and if there wasn't struggle, there wouldn't be a show. Um, and uh, we were you were in South Pacific, right?
I was there as a spectator. It was the first
Oh,
time I ever saw a show at St. Luke's, actually.
okay,
And it was actually partially what inspired me to join Pure Sound. So it was
okay.
still a seminal moment.
Well,
Uh,
let's put some context around that. St. Luke's Methodist Church in Houston, Texas, has a youth choir that sings every Sunday morning at the 8:30 service. They are brilliant, wonderful. They number varies from 50 to 100 depending on the season and the year. But they produce two musicals a year. One is in the spring; it's a book musical, and the other one was in the summer, and it would be something that it'd be a jukebox musical that I would write based
mm,
on uh, Sid would hand me 20 songs, and I would look at the young people that I was dealing with, and I would write that story based on who I saw them evolving as, or
mm,
where I saw their challenges. So that would be a little bit of a stretch. And Sam was part of the that group. And but what if you saw South Pacific? That's the first show that we ever almost canceled. It was Wednesday night before opening,
oh,
and we said it was Tuesday before opening, and we said the show's not ready. We have promised you we will not let you be embarrassed on stage, and the only way to do that at this point in time is not let you be on stage because this
oh
show is
gosh.
not ready. And the next night they rallied and they did the show. It was like from piece of garbage to ready to open on Broadway overnight based on we're going to lose this if we don't get our act together.
Yeah.
The only thing that changed was their presence in the story.
Mm,
The preparation we thought the preparation was they didn't know their lines, they didn't know the songs, they just weren't paying attention. It was they had gotten so good at it that they were phoning it in.
right.
And then when the thought, okay, you're gonna lose this, and we meant it because we just thought they weren't ready. I would have been much more angry if I'd known they just weren't working that hard. But that evolved and it opened and it became this incredible production. And all of it was amount the business of being present
Absolutely.
and realizing that the stakes were on them. I often say that there is no team sport that is more team oriented than theater because you
Yeah.
can't substitute. Everybody's got to show up. Everybody's got to do their part. They got to do it at the right time. It's a wonderful thing. So you're looking at teaching, and you're
Mhm.
looking at working in museum work. I can see in teaching there would be an aspect of performance because you're working to a small crowd. all the time. But where would you get that in your museum work? Where would that itch be scratched? Because you do have this intellectual go in a closet and learn about stuff and just, have little mind parties capability because you've got a gigantic intellect,
Oh
but you
gosh.
also have a social whimsy that is of equal giganticness. What, how would you, how would you make those two things work for you in museum work?
So, when I was working at the National Museum of Funeral History, which, you know, I think it's one of those things that sounds like it would be really weird. And it
Yeah.
is, it totally is. But it's also really cool. And, when you are creating a scene in a musical, I mean, so this is why my partner hates watching period pieces with me, because every time there's like a costume issue or there's like really, if we're watching a film set in the Middle Ages and everything is like these dank grays and greens, I'm just like, no, it should look like a Technicolor fever dream starring Donna Summer. Like the clothing would have been so bright. But the reason I take issue with stuff like that is mostly because when we are trying to understand a person, and I'm sure you find this with costuming and the sets you have, the body language of your actors towards each other, the choreography itself,
Right.
the setting and the clothing, it tells the audience something about that person. It says something about the life they've lived. It says something about their personality. And as that changes throughout the show, how they interact with like the physical world around them, it immerses the audience, yes, but it also makes that character's life tangible. When I was working at the museum, I was responsible, along with my colleague and friend Brandon, um, for basically revamping the Civil War era exhibit. And we were looking at setting up this Victorian mourning room. And, to an outsider, it kind of looks a bit like, I guess Norman Bates's mother's girlhood room. Um, but when you get to like hold these artifacts that somebody made with
Mhm.
painstaking detail and precision, even down to things like the hair jewelry or mourning jewelry, which is very intricate, you are holding pieces of someone's life, and how you display them and how you talk about them and how you frame them. It's sort of a popular refrain that I hear these days as an academic that kind of makes me just want to walk directly into the sea. But that's sort of like, facts don't care about your feelings. Facts are facts. And it's like, okay, well, you're right. Facts, they are facts. But what makes a fact important, what makes a detail important, is what story you are using that fact or detail to tell. So, in museum work, how we frame paintings, how we frame artifacts, we're telling a story. And depending on how you frame that, you can either have somebody come away with a completely new understanding of that person's life, to take Victorian mourning clothing from an oddity that you take a photo of and then forget about, to something fascinating, something that makes you think about a person from the past, not just in a, oh, they sure were weird back then kind of way, but as someone as rich and complicated as you yourself are.
Mhm.
And I think that is so cool. You can make it come alive the same way a good set and good costumes can
Right.
make a character come alive,
Right.
you know?
It's so good to hear you. It's good. It's so good to hear your mind. It is so delightful. We're going to have to wrap up because we're
Oh,
running out of time here. But um, uh, will you come back? Can I? Can we open this up again in a few weeks?
anytime, Steve. I would love that.
Okay. Well, I'll come up with another topic, and I'll give you enough heads up that you can worry about it appropriately.
Oh,
Um,
you got it.
my dear friend, my precious friend Sam Sandy in Dublin, Ireland, who I am going to find a way to come visit.
Yes.
Uh, thank you for talking to us on Crossroads Diner about decision points and humanity, self-forgiveness, and the lie that is imposter syndrome. We will talk again, and for all of you listening up, we'll be back with more of the Crossroads Diner next week. For now, Steve McCurdy and Sam Sandy out. Come on by and have a bite at the CrossRoad Diner, the place your spirit goes when it may be time to change direction.